This is Rabbi Polikov. I have no written records to which I can have recourse, and I have been spending quite a bit of time in researching many of the things through the sources that are available to me. And I have been able to compose the following picture as it will develop through your questionnaire that you have sent me. Question number 1, where and when did you first encounter Jewish survivors of the Holocaust? Who were these people? Concentration camp victims or individuals who hid during the war? What was your response to them? Well, to begin with, remember it was almost 30 years ago. I can pinpoint it to within the time between February the 24th and February the 28th, which was the time that the 29th Division made its historic jump off into Jülich and carried it into München-Gladbach. And there we captured Wright, which was the birthplace of Goebbels, and his historic castle was still intact. Before we got to München-Gladbach, during that 4-day period, I ran into the first known declared Jew. However, as I recall, he tried to tell me that he was not completely Jewish, but sort of a half or a quarter Jew. And he also told me that all of the Jews in that area had been either sent off or executed, and that he recalled that there was a Sefer Torah that was buried in a cemetery. When the Jews saw what was happening, they didn't want this to fall into the hands of the Nazis. I don't remember the name of this small town, but I do remember that he was very anxious to dig it up, and he really did know where it was. We did dig it up, but as you know, it's parchment, and you could see that it was decomposed just like skin would have been decomposed, and there was nothing there to save. The person had managed to hide. He was not in a concentration camp. The next Jews that I encountered, were in München-Gladbach, and that was the two girls, young girls who had also been posing as Polish girls and had been working as Christians. And I suppose you're not interested in all the details of it concerning that encounter, which was really a traumatic one. But briefly, I did manage to, with the help of the other soldiers who were delighted to come across these two girls who were really young at the time. One was 14, one was 16. And they provided them with all the clothes that I'd asked them to provide them with. We provided them with all kinds of food. We didn't have to go to anybody particularly. We were able to take care of them ourselves. And since at the time that we went into München-Gladbach, the 29th Division was practically in Corps or Army Reserve, and we had a lot of time to spend with them. And they told us their story about how they witnessed the execution of their parents and what their experiences had been all through until the time that we had come across them. As it developed, just around Pesach time, as I was making all my preparations for the Seder, we learned that we would be jumping off to cross the Rhine. We realized that our stay in reserve was short-lived, and it became imperative that we take these girls out of Germany and into Brussels. At that time, there were already restrictions upon the movements of people. We could not move around as freely as we did before. And the decision was that the only way we could really get them out was for me to put them into my Jeep and simply take them into Brussels, because no one would question a chaplain. Well, I did that, and I brought them out into Brussels, and I quartered them with some people whom we had known in Brussels, very fine people, contacted the family, and the family in Canada was delighted to learn that these two children had survived, and I am very, very happy to be able to tell you, too, that these two girls married. One married an American soldier while she was in Brussels, a very fine fellow from Santa Barbara, California, and then the other one was brought over to the United States, and she was married. They are grandmothers today, very, very fine, wonderful people. While we were there in Mönchengladbach, I also came across a very old man who also seemed to have been able to hide his identity and pose as a non-Jew. He was a musician, and he came from Eastern Europe. He had studied at the yeshiva at one time, but he hardly remembered anything. However, there was one thing that he always used to tell me with a great deal of gusto and would laugh heartily after telling it to me. He confused the authority for it, but he was right about the interpretation. He used to say to me, "You know, Rabbi," he says, I live up to the biblical dictum of Haftalah Reyacha Kamocha." He says, "You know what Rashi says on that?" Well, it's not really Rashi, but it is a drash in the Talmud. And he says, "You know what Rashi says?" Rashi says, "Broro lo misa yafa." He says, "I want the best death for them, all the Germans." During this time, the 29th Division was under the 9th Army. And up until the end of the war, when we reached the Elbe, we were constantly under the 9th Army until we went into occupation duty in the Bremen enclave area. However, we did not come across larger groups of Jews until after we crossed the Rhine, which was after April the 2nd. Several places we came across larger concentrations of Jews, and at that time, I was being with the division and being on the move, there wasn't too much that I could really do for them, except to give them clothes, food, and all kinds of supplies that we happened to have at the time or were available through the division headquarters. So we really didn't have too much time with to really help them in any material way. Except to make them feel good and to give them these things that they needed very sorely at that particular time. But as far as permanent help, we were not able to do much at that time. On April the 8th, the 29th Division was assigned the duty of caring for the DPs. The big problem was to keep them off the roads, and so that they shouldn't impede the military traffic that was so necessary and important at the time. It was not an easy job, and in several of these groups, I would get them together and try to explain to them that we are not really able to stop and to help them in a permanent sense, just to ease their lot, but at the same time, the troops that would be following us, they would be quartered here more permanently, and therefore would be in a better position to take care of them, and assured them that they definitely would. But at the same time, it was for their own interest as well as for ours to keep those roads cleared so that the military traffic should not be impeded. It was at that time that I noticed, too, the beginnings of what later developed into a very sad situation that was not peculiar to non-Jews alone, but even to Jews, and unfortunately even to Jews back here in the United States. And that is that there was a complete misunderstanding as far as the whole context of matters were concerned. Now, these people from the concentration camps, and these people were from concentration camps who had been marched to different places, but then they were abandoned and we overtook them. That's how we came across them. These were already concentration camp people. And I could see from them that they felt that if they were ever liberated, they really had no hopes of ever being liberated. But they felt that if there ever was such a miracle that they would have been liberated, that then the world, in just partial atonement for having permitted to be done to them what was done to them, that they would never have to work for the rest of their lives, that people would bring them all kinds of presents and gifts, and they would provide them with palaces, and they would carry them on gold litters, and the kind, and this only in partial atonement, and you could tell that also from the songs that they were singing at the time. The American soldiers, on the other hand, were under the impression that these people ought to be grateful to us. After all, we liberated them. And I could see the beginnings right there of a kind of a clash that unfortunately did develop later on with the military government personnel who were not really combat troops and didn't see most of the atrocious things that the Nazis had perpetrated. And they were more sympathetic towards the Germans for the simple reason they were more appealing, particularly the women. And in that way, we had the beginnings of these clashes. But really, they were not pronounced, and they were only slightly noticeable to a trained eye, really. But you'd really have to strain to note it. But unfortunately, later, this is what did develop. And I tried to explain these things to the general and to the officers. And I think they understood it and appreciated it, but, there's all difference in the world between knowing something intellectually and really being able to live with it. Reality is still reality. And particularly, I don't think we could have that much that many complaints against them, since look what happened here in the United States. You always also find that resentment now. I keep telling people all the time that the people tell me, well, these refugees, they think that that the world owes them everything, and I tell people I think that they're right. The world does. So it's one of these things that I know that I don't voice the popular opinion when I say these things, but this is the way I feel, and I feel that they are entitled to all these things. I've been rambling, so let me try to get it back again in line with your questions. Question number 2 is, with what Army unit were you involved during the period in which you helped the survivors of the Holocaust? Well, I answered that was the 9th Army. I was with the 29th Division. We were under the 9th Army. Question number 3, what other experiences did you have with the remnants of European Jewry after this initial encounter? Well, I told you about these other groups of prisoners from concentration camps that we had overrun on our march to the Elbe. However, before I go into the and to other groups that I was involved in after the occupation, Let me go down to some of your other questions. Question number 4: were you involved in getting packages from the United States and distributing them to the survivors? If so, please state how this developed. Well, no, I was not, as I told you, because I was with a division and we were constantly on the go. We didn't have that much time, except with these 2 girls that I told you about, whom I consider to be my children. Question number 5: how were you able to provide food and other necessities to these survivors? Well, that wasn't really much of a problem as long as we were around. Whatever I had and whatever I asked of the soldiers, I really didn't have to beat on them. Whenever I tell them I want this for the Jews, they would not only give me what they had, but they would see to it that their friends and everybody else involved would come forth and leave things with them, so that they were quite well provided, at least for a good long time after we left. Question number 6: what was the response of the Jewish and Gentile GIs when you needed their assistance in helping the survivors? Well, as I told you, very, very good. To what extent was your Jewish personnel involved in helping the survivors prior to and during your own involvement? I wasn't always the first one to come across these groups. The Jewish personnel would generally come across them and notify me, and then we would all be pitching in to see to it that they are helped as much as was within our power to do at the time. Question number 7: what was the American Army's reaction to your activities on behalf of European Jewry on all levels? My experiences were that they were very good, that they went out of their way to be helpful. Even though at times they were irritated, as I stated before, because they felt they were impeding the military effort, yet I was able to make them understand, and they did understand, and they appreciated the situation. And as far as I was concerned, their contacts were very good. The only time I did have any kind of difficulty was when I would go back to a group that I had come across before in order to see how things were going with them, and find that the troops who were non-combat troops of the military government had moved in, and generally in order to make things easier for themselves, they would get a hold of some of the Germans who had been running the town before in order to make things easier for them. And of course they'd go after these German girls and women. And once in a while you'd find some of them who had become influenced by them. But during the time that I was there, it was not really that pronounced. I understand later on, but this was not my personal experience, later on, that it did become a serious problem. Number 8, did you have any contact with the JDC, and if so, how would you describe your association with them? How did you view your role? With whom did you work? How would you evaluate their efforts? Well, I had contacts with the JDC. After all, Dr. Joseph Schwartz is my mother's brother. And whenever some of the personnel from the JDC would come around, there were people that I was on the lookout for, and they would all say to me, well, we know about them because we got orders from Dr. Schwartz to be on the lookout for them. And, of course, as I say, I didn't have too much association with them, because during the time that we were in active combat until we went into occupation duty. Once we went to occupation duty, then things were different. We did have some contact with them, although we didn't have too much, for the simple reason that the British were the ones who were more directly in contact with us. Remember, we were an enclave area. We were surrounded on 3 sides by the British, and on the 4th by the water. And as far as my own personal experiences were concerned, the British were dogs, and they haven't stopped being that. Question 9, did you work with a Jewish agency during your stay in Europe? Not really, just indirectly. I had association with them, and a trip that I made to Belsen with a group under the leadership of this Member of Parliament Silverman, as I recall. But I was a part of the party unofficially. Question number 10, what was the nature of your involvement? Please be specific. Well, I told you about that. Question 11, did you work with UNRWA? Please tell me about your specific experiences and general impression of their work. No, I did not work with UNRWA. I saw what they were doing, and as far as I was concerned, I could see that in those camps there were no Jews. And I guess this is about the best time for me to start telling you about the Jews that I was involved with during the time that we were doing occupation duty in the Bremen Enclave area. I was able to reestablish the Jewish community, if you can call it reestablish. There were some people who were there, a Mr. Katz. I imagine he's still there, and subsequently I learned that he became a multimillionaire. Well, I wish him all good from it. I was instrumental in getting back some of his properties during the time that I was there, because I didn't do too much occupation duty either. I went home, I had been overseas for quite a long time, and I went home quite early, so that I didn't have too much time even in occupation duty. But I did have time to establish the Jewish community. The way I did that was, obviously, when we went into occupation, all the religious groups would rally around their particular denomination. Of course, there were no synagogues left in Bremen or the Bremen area, and I approached the general and told him that, the Catholics, the Protestants, they all have their centers of worship. I don't have it. And the general asked me, well, what do you want, Chaplain? I said, well, this was General Gerhardt. I said, I would like to have your authority, since he was the military governor of the whole enclave area at the time. I said, I would like to have your permission, your authority to requisition any building within our area for our purposes, to use it for a synagogue and for a headquarters for the Jewish people and Jewish personnel. And he readily gave me this authority, and I went out and I requisitioned a palatial, I guess it was a home at one time, right on the Weser River. It had about 35 rooms in it, tremendous rooms, and it was the headquarters at one time, or right before the end of the war, the headquarters of this Pierce and Muller, some kind of a cotton firm. I know that these people were very much put out with the fact that I requisitioned their building, which was one of the few buildings that were left intact. And this fellow Pierce, I think, was an Englishman as well as a German, and he had his relationships with the American State Department, and he tried to take the building back from me by writing to the State Department. But my boys intercepted the letter, and I had him thrown in jail and told him anytime he tries any kind of monkey business, he's not going to stay there for 2 weeks, but he'll stay there for 2 years. And so I didn't have any more trouble from him, although he used to come around every once in a while and pester me. However, since I did establish that building, it soon became very well known that this was the Jewish headquarters. And so the Jewish people who had been drifting back would gravitate into this place and make contact with me. And through that, I was able to establish a community. And many of the people who were there at that time subsequently came back to the United States and did establish themselves in the United States and were very successful. And I was very, very happy to learn how well things went with them. During my short stay in Bremen, I had occasion to come across a group of Lithuanian and Polish Jews, which was particularly important to me that we came across some Lithuanian Jews. Now, I had studied at the Telzer Yeshiva in Telz, Lithuania, and I had a great many friends from Lithuania. But unfortunately, there were very few survivors, and particularly in our area, we didn't come across Lithuanian Jews. But one day, as I was sitting in my office, I had this surprise visit of a couple of young boys came to me crying. And they told me that they are part of a group of about 50 Polish and Lithuanian Jews who are in the British area, but that one of their boys was arrested by the German police. And they asked me to get him released from the jail. I went down to the jail, and I took special delight in being very rough and coarse and vulgar with the German authorities, and had him released. Again, unfortunately, the man who was in charge of the jail was an American major, and he tried to stop me, but I told him in no uncertain terms that he's going to have to release him. And he said, all right, well, would you just sign for him? Which I did. I don't want to go into the details of that because I don't think it's too important for your purposes. Just perhaps it may build up my ego. But the important thing, the reason I'm telling you about this is that subsequently I started making inquiries. Well, where are you? And they told me where they were. And I said, all right, I'll tell you what I'll do. You come over to the American zone, and I will find a place for you, and I will be able to provide you with food. They did that, and I found a place which had been the property of the Jewish community, and although it wasn't livable in the condition that it was at the time that I took it over, but it could very readily be made livable, and they did apply themselves to it and did make it livable, and I brought them everything that they needed. I think it was at that time, too, that the Jewish community, I let them operate on their own, were receiving all kinds of packages and aid from UNRWA. But I was not directly involved in it because I gave the head of the Jewish community, I let them run their own community, and I gave them a room in this building of mine and told them whatever has to be done, you do it. If you run into any problems, then let me know and I'll get involved in it. So that my purpose was twofold. First was I wanted them to feel that they are independent and that they could operate independently and they didn't have to have anybody looking after them, which really they didn't, because these were people who were not only mature people, but they were people who had been in business themselves too, and I didn't want to give them a kind of an inferiority complex. I also felt that they were entitled to everything that anybody else was entitled to, and that they could deal with them on their own, and which would help them too in their relationships with the German authorities, with whom they had to deal anyhow. So that therefore I stayed on the sidelines and only becoming involved when there was a problem, which from time to time a problem would come up and they would call upon me and I would get the thing straightened out to the satisfaction of the Jewish community and not to the satisfaction of the military or the German community. And so I got these Jews to come over, and they were really very, very happy. And as a matter of fact, when my time came to leave, they were quite distraught. They didn't know how another chaplain would care for them. And at that time, too, all the Jews made a big party for me, and they brought me presents. These Jews were sitting there, and they were grateful to me. They wanted to express their gratitude. But how could they express their gratitude? You know, everything they had, I had given them. It was all mine. How are they going to express it in a tangible way? So they went out and they drew up a document in Yiddish saying that we 50 Jews from the concentration camp will never forget you, Rabbi Polikov, and so forth, and giving me blessings that I'm sure that they were effective. And I still have that document, and I proudly cherish that document. I don't know what happened to them subsequently, but I certainly do hope that all of them fared very, very well. You asked me too, were you involved in Aliyah Bet? If yes, please be specific. How would you characterize your role in this work? Well, I cannot be too specific because I don't remember the names and I didn't make a note of these things at the time that they occurred. But I had made it my business to maintain contact with the Jewish Brigade. I visited them on several occasions. And one day as I was sitting in my office in Bremen, one of the men with whom I had become familiar, an officer, came into my office, and I was delighted to see him. He's a very pleasant, fine fellow. And we were talking for a while. Then he said to me, you know, Rabbi, I want you to get me a ship, a seaworthy ship. I said to him, you must be out of your mind. How am I going to get you a ship? Well, he said, you know people here who have been involved in the shipping industry? I said, yes. He said, okay, well, how about introducing me to them? I said, I'll be delighted to do so. I said, but how are you going to get a ship out of here? And the fellow said, don't worry, Chaplain. We'll take care of it. you just do what we want you to do. We'll do the rest of it. Well, I introduced him to these people. And I know that he did get that ship. I don't know what name they gave to it. But later I was told that it was quite helpful to them in getting Jews out of Germany and having some of them brought into the land of Israel. So that was my contact with Aliyah Bet. Of course, I was involved being the chaplain there. I'd get these Jews coming from the DP camps. They would be coming from the American zone, and then they'd be going to the British zone. Then you'd have the traffic going from the British zone to the American zone. And it was really astounding because I saw that these people would tell me give me the same reasons for leaving the American zone, going to the British, as those who were leaving the British wanted to get into the American zone. I suppose it was a matter that these people were simply unhappy and they were just looking for something that would better their lot. I was also astounded while I was doing this occupation duty in Bremen. A man came into my office and told me that he was a Jew. And the way he was talking, he didn't sound like a Jew. And I started questioning him. He didn't even know anything about Yom Kippur, and I was going to throw him out of the office. But some of the other boys, that is from the concentration camps who had drifted back to Bremen, said to me, "No, Rabbi, we know him. He is a Jew." I said, "What are you talking about? This man was from Warsaw. A man from Warsaw, a Jew from Warsaw, shouldn't know what Yom Kippur is?" And they told me, yes, you'd be surprised. There were the kind of assimilationist Jews in Warsaw who did not know what Yom Kippur is. And he was one of them. I have pictures of the home that I requisitioned and all these, some of the activities and so forth. But I suppose I could let you have some of them if you would want them, although I don't know whether how much value you would place on these things. That you can let me know. Now you have a question with what other Jewish organizations were you involved during this period? Describe this involvement. Well, I think I've described my involvement with the Jewish organizations as such. And question 14, were you ever called upon to smooth relations between DPs and the United States Army? Please be specific about places, dates, and people involved. The only time that I had it was during the time that I told you when we were still on the move. Once we went into occupation, I had no problems. At least my people, my Jewish community in Bremen, had no problems with the United States Army, and I suppose it was for the reason that I let them operate independently on their own, and then any time there was a problem, they would just come to me and we would take care of the problem. So I suppose that they established their own good relationships with the Army, and there was no problem in it. And if the Army felt there was anything, they would always contact me. So we really had no problem. On 15, were you involved in work within the concentration camps? What was the exact nature of your activities? Give as many examples as possible with specific dates, places, and people involved. No, I was not involved. There were no concentration camps that we came across as a unit, although I personally did have the opportunity to visit Belsen, and there was nothing that I personally could do at that time, because at that time we were already in occupation and the zones were gelled, and there was nothing that I personally as a military man could do at that particular time. However, you know, with this matter of Belsen, you note that I avoid using the name Bergen-Belsen, and I have a particular aversion to that combined name that is so misleading. And the reason for it is that if it were not for that name, the Jews in the Belsen concentration camp would have been released much earlier. We had been looking, when I say we, I mean the Jewish chaplains had been looking for this place that we would hear these Jews talk about. They would say Bergen-Belsen. Now, we used to pore over maps. I used to spend nights poring over maps looking for Bergen-Belsen. Now, I saw Belsen on the map, and I saw a place Bergen, but I did not see a place Bergen-Belsen. And I discussed this with some of the other chaplains, too. And we all decided that, you just can't take chances in going into these places, because at that time we were still in the war. And although, and particularly because our lines were very fluid, we didn't know whether you could take chances to go into these places or not, to explore them and to investigate them. Actually, there is no such place that is called Bergen-Belsen. There is a town, Bergen. Close to it is a village, Belsen. Outside of the village of Belsen was the concentration camp. Now, these were not far from a town called Celle. Celle. I was in Celle at the beginning of April. And I did not know how close I was to the concentration camp, nor did I know that we were not that we were in enemy territory. We were lost, as a matter of fact. When I say we, I mean my assistant who was driving. We were lost, and we noticed that the wires were no longer strung there, and we realized that this meant that we were not in American territory. We didn't know whether this was German territory or whether it was the territory of the British who were supposed to be on our northern flank. At any rate, on our way, we noted that there were quite a few German soldiers on the side of the road with their arms. We didn't stop to investigate. They looked at us and they saw that emblem of the Ten Commandments and the Star of David and so forth. And I suppose that they were as much afraid of us as we were of them, until I got into this town, Celle, and it was quite late in the afternoon. There was a big town square, and right in the middle of that square was this, I suppose it was a watering place for horses. And I drove my Jeep right in there, and I saw the sides of the square were lined with, it looked like prisoners. They were wearing prisoners' garb. And I thought, my God, if these people are prisoners and there are Jews among them, they see me, they see my Jeep, they see this Jewish flag and everything that was Jewish, they would come over. But they didn't. They just stood there on the sides and sort of a stupid grin on their faces. I couldn't make out who they were, but I went over to some of them and tried to talk to them, and I got no response. And I don't know, perhaps they were Italians. And since there was no way of me to make any contact with them, which I tried to do, my assistant said, listen, Chaplain, you know, we are in enemy territory now, and it is getting late. We better really find our way back to our own lines. And of course he was right. I couldn't endanger his life, and so we tried to make our way back, which we did successfully. And it was with a great deal of chagrin that I found out subsequently that I was only a few miles away from the Belsen concentration camp. Had I known where we were, there's no question in my mind, but had I notified the general, he would have sent a detachment in there to take it and to bring help to the victims. And that is why, to me, I have a special aversion to that cursed name, Bergen-Belsen. Had they stuck to the name Belsen, we would have been able to do things for them, and perhaps many more thousands would have been alive, because it was during that period that the typhus or typhoid epidemic hit the camp, and so many thousands died at that time. Question 16, did you ever collect guns, ammunition, and or money to be sent to Palestine? If so, please be specific about how this came about. That is, who initiated it, how it developed, and what happened with this program. During the time that I was overseas, the answer is no. After I came back, the answer is yes. The people from, I don't know which group it was, but they approached me and took all my guns away from me. And I suppose that by now I'm glad that they took the guns, but it was only after I was back in the United States. Question number 17, were you involved in working with other Jewish chaplains on the Jewish refugee problem? If so, with whom, when, and about what? Well, not really. The chaplains would get together, that is, we would meet each other and contact each other and trying to locate and find these people, but not really working together on it, except for the fact that I had this chaplain Mossman who came to be my assistant after we had gone into occupation, and then after I left, he took over. But other than that, I did not work with any other chaplains, Jewish chaplains, or any other chaplain. 18. Question number 18. How would you characterize the role of the American Jewish chaplain during this period of 1944-48? How would you characterize your role during the period you worked with survivors of the Holocaust? Well, I really didn't have that much time to work with them, although I am still very, very happy that I was able to reestablish the Jewish community in Bremen. As a matter of fact, I've lost contact with them. I don't know how they have developed. I would love to get more information, but I just had no desire whatsoever to return to Germany. And so I have lost contact with them. Although when I come across some of the people who were in the original Jewish community that I had reestablished, they give me some kinds of reports, but not really definitive reports. If you have any reports on them, I'd appreciate finding out about them. Question number 19. What do you think might have happened there if you had not been there at that time? What do you think might have happened if the American Jewish chaplains had not been in Europe to help the survivors of the Holocaust? Well, I don't think that they would not have been helped because it was too gruesome. Whatever was done to them was too gruesome, and a civilized person could not tolerate this kind of a thing. However, I'm sure that the presence of the Jewish chaplains meant a great deal because it sort of focused attention on them. And I think that the Jews did receive special treatment, and I'm sure that the reason they received special treatment was because of the presence of Jewish chaplains there at the time. When I say special treatment, because remember, DPs were not Jews alone. There were so many of the French and Italian and all kinds of European countries who were there. So that, as a matter of fact, in the Bremen Enclave area, there were no Jews in the DP camps. Although we had DP camps, there were no Jews there because the Jews already were out. I got them out into the community. So I suppose that the chaplains did help materially, and I'm sure that it was a great boon to the survivors. But I think that they would have been helped anyhow, but not as well and not with as much consideration. Question 20. Is there any area that I have not touched upon that you feel should be discussed? If so, please be as specific as possible. Do you have any other comments you would like to make before we end this interview? Well, from my own experiences, I would say that it perhaps would have been a lot better for the survivors if the Jewish agencies would have made it their business to contact the chaplains and to brief them and to try to maintain the communication with them. Now, I know it's a big problem, and I know that it's not that easy and so forth, but, it's a matter of, I think that we ought to bear in mind that it's always good to try to maintain that kind of a contact so that when there is a necessity of doing some work, that it could be helped along much better by maintaining contact with the authorities or those who represent authority in those particular areas. I don't know what you mean about to have comments on other things. Other than that, I have no comments. If you want me to elaborate on any other matters, I shall be delighted to do so. you just informed me. I don't think I have omitted anything that would be of interest to you, although, of course, relying upon memory alone, you never know what are the things that one misses. So let me think for a while. Second thought, I do believe that there ought to be a real a strong attempt made by the so-called Jewish leadership to put the what we call the refugees, even today, in a much better and understanding light, so that, because even today there's still a lot of resentment on the part of the local populations towards those whom they call the refugees. And while one can understand it, at the same time, I think that we ought to understand that we cannot deal with them as we would with people normally. Which brings me to another comment. I really don't believe that anyone who has ever been forced to go through the experiences that these people have gone through in the concentration camp could have come out without being in some way affected. And I'm talking about mentality, and I think that, or we might even call it aberrations, slightly or to a greater degree, not enough to incapacitate the person, but enough to make him different from what we would call a normal person. And I think it's important for the local populations to understand these things, and that therefore refugees cannot be placed in the same category with the rest of the population and must be given a special kind of treatment. I feel very, very strongly about this matter. Well, I guess that's about it for me, and I hope I've been able to be of help to you, and if I can be of any further help, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much. This is Rabbi Polikov signing off.